Unmute myself here. Okay.
Pat coffee.
For all those that just joined, we're going to be streaming this live to YouTube, and I'm about to begin a video presentation, so I'm muting everybody. Thank you.
This world would like to make me lonely, but I got my friends with me. We're trying hard to help others find friends eternally. Oh, and I would worry about me. Ooh, this world would bring me down. I'm feeling better, lifting others off the ground. Look what I found. I wanna know what I can do. I wanna give what I can give. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. I'm where I wanna be. This is the best life ever. So many good things yet to be done with these two hands of mine. I'll take some love and build us a bridge. Connects your heart to mine. Oh, when I would worry about me, ooh, this world would bring me down. I'm feeling better, lifting others off the ground. Look what I found. I wanna know what I can do. I wanna give what I can give. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. It's better than a dream. This is the best life. I'm not afraid, come what may. This kind of life gets better every day, every day, every way. Oh, I wanna live for more than me. I wanna give till I feel free. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. Come with me, you'll see. This is the best life ever. This is the best life ever. This is the best life ever.
Take a moment now and picture the scene. Up ahead on the path are what seem to be children laughing at play. In a world free of the fears we once faced, and taking care of this beautiful earth are a people that live by our Father's words. Until the moon is no more, there is the peace we have been waiting for. shines like the sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come. Take a moment now and think of our place, by the mountains and rivers or wide open plains. It's a place to call home. And now walking in through your front door, there is someone that you know, holding out his open arms in hopes of a tearful embrace. Feels like forever since you've been face to face. Even death won't stop our God's outstretched love in the new world to come. Hope is a fire in our hearts. Hope is an anchor that holds us firm. Hope is a light that shines like the sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come. And every word from his mouth,
every word from his mouth,
will do all for which he sent it out. Jehovah's will for this earth,
Jehovah's will for this earth,
fulfilling every living thing's last wish. A light that shines like the sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come.
to come,
New world to come. In the new world to come. In the new world to come.
This world would like to make me lonely, but I got my friends with me. We're trying hard to help others find friends eternally. Oh, and I would worry about me, ooh, this world would bring me down. I'm feeling better, lifting others off the ground. Look what I found. I wanna know what I can do. I wanna give what I can give. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. I'm where I want to be. This is the best life ever. So many good things yet to be done with these two hands of mine. I'll take some love and build us a bridge that connects your heart to mine. Oh, and I wouldn't worry about me. Ooh, this world would bring me down. I'm feeling better, lifting others off the ground. Look what I found. I wanna know what I can do. I wanna give what I can give. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. It's better than a dream. This is the best life. I'm not afraid, come what may. This kind of love gets better every day, every day, every way. Oh, I wanna live for more than me. I wanna give till I feel free. That is the best feeling ever. I know this will last forever. Come with me, you'll see. This is the best life ever. This is the best life ever. This is the best life ever.
Take a moment now and picture the scene. Up ahead on the path are what seem to be children laughing at play. In a world free of the fears we once faced, and taking care of this beautiful earth are a people that live by our Father's words. Until the moon is no more, there is the peace we have been waiting for. We will feel His love under the rule of His Son in the new world to come. Hope is a fire in our hearts. Hope is an anchor that holds us firm. Hope is a light that shines like a sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come. Take a moment now and think of our place by the mountains and rivers or wide open plains. It's a place to call home. And now walking in through your front door, there is someone that you know, holding out his arms in hopes of a tearful embrace. Feels like forever since you've been face to face. Even death won't stop our God's outstretched love in the new world to come. Hope is a fire in our hearts. Hope is an anchor that holds us firm. Hope is a light that shines like the sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come. And every word from His mouth,
Every word from His mouth
will do all for which He sent it out. Jehovah's will for this earth
Jehovah's will for
is
this earth,
fulfilling every living thing's last wish. Hope is a fire in our hearts. Hope is an anchor that holds us firm. Hope is a light that shines like the sun as we see ourselves there in the new world to come.
to come,
New world to come. In the new world to come.
world to
In the
come,
new world to come.
to come.
Just in case you're wondering, I'm Kevin Peterson, and that was my mother, Adeline Peterson. And a couple of years ago, I asked my mother if she had thought about who she would want to give her memorial service whenever the time comes. And without hesitation, she says, well, I expect you to do it. She says, you know me better than anybody else does. And I was taken aback for a moment. And I said, well, yeah, but I'm, emotionally close to you. What if I can't do that? What if I get choked up? And she says, you'll be fine. So here we are. And hopefully everything will go well. So on July 11th, 1922, Adeline Beatrice Peterson was born as Adeline Beatrice Wild in DeForest, Wisconsin. That's a suburb just north of Madison. On August 29th, 2021, she passed away in her sleep at the age of 99. On September 13th, 1941, she married Lyle Peterson, thus becoming Adeline Peterson, and thereafter celebrated 67 anniversaries with him, the last one being 1 week before he died in 2008. There are many experiences that could be related about what she did with her long life. And some of that we've detailed in the online obituary and in the brochure that I'm sure all of you got. So we're not going to go through a lot of those details or names of children and grandchildren. At this time, we don't have time for that. But we're going to focus on what she did to make a good name. Now, what do we mean by that? If you have your Bibles with you, turn with me to Ecclesiastes chapter 7, beginning in verse 1. This has some very thought-provoking things for us to think about. It says, a good name is better than good oil, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. Better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of every man, and the living should take it to heart. Skipping down to verse 4, it says, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the stupid is in the house of rejoicing. But what does it mean a good name is better than good oil? Well, a name is a person's reputation. And in this particular context, we have in mind a good name with God. because Jesus said in Matthew chapter 6, verse 20, that a person should store up treasures in heaven. And why does it say the day of death is better than the day of birth? Well, at the day of birth, you haven't really done anything. You don't know how this person is going to turn out, what their life is going to be like, what they'll do with it. But on the day of death, the story has been written. Now you can go back and look at the events of that life and learn something from it. Because it says, better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. Now, if you were given the choice between going to a party and going to a funeral, which would be your preference? Well, this says it's better to go to the funeral or the memorial service. Why is that? It's not so much for the benefit of the person who has died, it's for the benefit of those of us who are still alive. Because it says that that's the end of every man. That's something that is an eventuality that at this time, all of us will end up at. So we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing with our lives? Are we squandering our life or are we using it wisely? And so as we look at what Adeline did with her life, we can think about what we're doing with ours. One day, or rather in Adeline's life, she always had a desire to understand the Bible and to draw close to God. She wanted to know more about it. She also had an intense interest in other people. She would ask people's names and remember them. She would ask about their families and details, and she would remember that too. And she had a desire to do things for them, to help them. Now, although she grew up in the Depression era and learned how to be thrifty, she was also very generous when the need came. And people always remember her as always smiling and always having a positive attitude. So those are some things that we can think about as far as making a good name. One day early in 1957, a woman called at her door at her house in Madison, Wisconsin, and Adeline would have dismissed her, but this woman told her something that she didn't know before. And she showed her from the Bible that this was true. Well, this got her interest, and she wanted to know more. So that led to other visits, and those visits led to a regular weekly Bible study. Now, at the time, her husband Lyle was working in Milwaukee, and he would live in an apartment during the week and then come home on the weekend to spend the time with his family. So Adeline would have her Bible study during the week, and then when he would come home, she would tell him all that she had learned. And he was interested too. He wanted to learn more. So he asked her, he said, well, do you think it's possible that maybe they could come on the weekend when I'm home and then I could sit in on the Bible study and we could both learn at the same time? And she says, well, I'm not sure that'll work. You know, the weekend is a time when people like to have fun. They go out on Friday and Saturday night and have a good time. I don't think people are going to want to take some of their weekend time to study the Bible with somebody. And he said, well, why don't you ask them and see what they say? So she did. She asked them, and surprisingly enough, they were thrilled at the idea of coming on the weekend and studying the Bible with the both of them as a couple. So as they progressed, studying with Charles and Minerva Keene, they soon started to come to the meetings at the Kingdom Hall. Now, about this time, about the middle of 1957, Lyle and Adeline talked about going back to California from Wisconsin. During World War II, Lyle had been in the Navy, and in the last 2 years of the war, he'd been stationed at the Alameda Naval Base. And he and Adeline lived in an apartment off base in Oakland. After the war, Lyle went to college in Berkeley for 4 years and got a degree in accounting. When they were finished with that, he was homesick, and they wanted to go back to Madison, Wisconsin, where both of them were raised. And so they did that. Well, now they remembered how things were in the Bay Area, and they wanted to go back there. So Lyle went out first and went to look for a job and a house, and he found both. So in December, about mid-December, 1957, Adeline and young Kevin, who was 7 years old at the time, flew out from Madison to San Francisco and began their new life on 262 Boyd Road, Pleasant Hill. Now, when they got there, they wondered how they were going to get in touch with Jehovah's Witnesses again. At the time, they weren't listing the Kingdom Hall in the phone book, and they didn't know how to find it, although it was actually only a few blocks away on Woodsworth Lane at the time. But Lyle says, well, Jehovah's Witnesses go door to door. It's only a matter of time before they come to our door, and then we'll know where the Kingdom Hall is. So that's what they did. They just decided to wait. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, on New Year's Day, 1958, 2 women knocked at their door, and they were Jehovah's Witnesses. And Adeline opened the door and said, "Where have you been? We've been waiting for you. We want to study the Bible, and we want to go to the meetings at the Kingdom Hall." Now, for those of you that don't know, that's not a usual response that we get at the doors. And I'm sure the 2 sisters were taken aback at first and probably wondered if they were on candid camera or something. But they made arrangements for Lyle and Adeline to resume their Bible study, and they showed them where the Kingdom Hall was, and they started coming to the meetings. Soon after that, they started participating in the door-to-door ministry. And then a small problem came up. The woman that was helping Adeline said, Adeline wants to go out in the ministry every single day. I can't keep up with that. Well, they got over that problem, and but Adeline still wanted to go out in the ministry as much as possible because she wanted to share the things that she was so thrilled about with other people. She had tried sharing it with her relatives, and they thought that she was crazy. In fact, her sister said people that study the Bible end up going crazy. But in that, she was in good company because Jesus in Mark chapter 3, verse 21, had a similar experience. His relatives thought he had gone out of his mind, and they tried to form an intervention and grab him and take him out of the public view so that he wouldn't embarrass himself and the family. The Apostle Paul was also told by King Herod, "Great learning is driving you mad." So it's not uncommon for people to think that when you get excited about what you learn from the Bible, that you've lost your mind. And that didn't stop them. So they continued studying, they continued progressing, and on March 17th, 1958, both Lyle and Adeline were baptized together at a circuit assembly held in Richmond, California at the Richmond Auditorium. By the mid-1960s, Adeline was conducting about 7 Bible studies each week, and she was not a full-time minister. She was just a regular publisher, but she was very zealous about and very active in sharing the truth with others, as was Lyle. In the decades since, the family regularly attended weekly meetings, assemblies, and conventions in various places. In the 1990s, Adeline was invited to be a delegate to an international convention in Eastern Europe, so she and Lyle went to that. In 1995, she became a full-time minister or pioneer and attended Pioneer School in 1996. Some have said that Adeline reminded them of Anna in Luke chapter 2, verse 37, who was never missing at the temple. And because of their habit as a family of regularly attending the meetings and participating in the ministry, in about 1972, they were asked to move to the Walnut Creek congregation. They still lived on Boyd Road in Pleasant Hill, but were asked to attend Walnut Creek, and they did so for the rest of their lives. That habit of regular meeting attendance continued right down to the end. Adeline attended her last meeting on Tuesday night, August 24th, and the next meeting would have been Sunday morning, the 29th, and she passed away in her sleep peacefully during the night, early in the morning of Sunday. So considering all of that, we can truly say that Adeline made a good name with God, and that's the important thing. She is actually in the safest place that she can possibly be, and that is in God's memory. Now, have you ever noticed that we never seem to get used to the idea of death and death ending life? Whether it's especially when it faces us personally or those that are close to us. It's like we just can't get our mind around it, even though it's been with the human family for practically its whole existence. Well, there's a reason for that. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, it says that God put eternity in the hearts of humans. And that means that they have not only the concept of living forever, but the desire to and the expectation to. Now, is that cruel on God's part to put a desire in their hearts that they could never satisfy, that was impossible? No, because God's original purpose was that humans would never die. Now, that might sound strange to you, but if we go back to the book of Genesis, we'll realize that God's original purpose was that humans would live forever on the earth, and they would grow in numbers, and their children would also live forever on the earth. We'll start in Genesis chapter 2, and in verse 9, it says, "Thus Jehovah God made to grow out of the ground every tree that was pleasing to look at and good for food, and also the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad." So you notice there were two trees. Sometimes we forget that there were two trees. We think about the one. Most people are aware of the fact that Adam and Eve disobeyed and ate of the fruit that they were not supposed to eat of. But we forget about the other tree, the tree of life. Why was that there? Well, we'll see a little later on. Drop down to verse 17, and God gives this command to humans. He says, "But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, you must not eat from it, for in the day you eat from it, you will certainly die." So that was very clear. They were not to eat of that fruit, and if they did, they would die. If you think about that, and you think about the converse, that would indicate that if they did not disobey, if they did not eat of that fruit, they would not die. If they would not die, doesn't that mean that they would continue living on forever? You might say, well, that's a bit of a stretch, but we'll see that that was God's intention as we go on. Now, if you look at the next chapter, chapter 3, and we go down to verse 19, at this point, they did disobey. They ate of the fruit that they were not supposed to eat from, and God is sentencing them to what he promised would happen, and that is that they would die. So this is what that would mean. He says, "In the sweat of your face, you will eat bread until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you will return." So that's what death would mean to them. They would cease to live, their body would decay and go back to the state of the dust of the ground that they were in before they were created. So what were they before God created them out of the dust of the ground? They were nothing. They were non-existent. And that's what they would become. That's what death would mean for them. This is actually confirmed in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, verse 10, where it says that there's no knowledge or no consciousness in the grave where you are going. If we go further down to verse 22, notice what action God took next. Jehovah God then said, "Here the man has become like one of us, knowing good and bad. Now, in order that he may not put his hand out and take fruit also from the tree of life and eat and live forever," with that, Jehovah God expelled him from the Garden of Eden. And then at the bottom of verse 24, he posted a guard at the entrance to Eden. And the purpose of that was to guard the way to the tree of life. So now we get back to that other tree, the tree of life. God never told them that they could not eat of the tree of life, only the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. But once they ate of the tree that he forbade them to eat from, now it wasn't appropriate for them to eat of the tree of life. And so he took steps to prevent it. But you notice what he said there? He said, in order that he may not put his hand out and take fruit also from the tree of life and eat and live forever. Now, God had created that tree and put it in the garden for a reason. We may never know his complete reason or what he had intended to happen if they had not sinned. But it's clear here that he intended for them to eat from the tree of life and live forever. That's what God intended for humans, that they would all be able to live forever. You might say, well, why does that affect me? That was just Adam and Eve. They did something that was wrong and they died. Why do we have to die? Well, if you look over at Romans chapter 5, verse 12, it explains it very clearly. In Romans chapter 5, verse 12, it says, that is why just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because they had all sinned. To realize how that would work, imagine if you owned a large amount of property and wealth, but you squandered that and you ended up becoming bankrupt. You lost everything that you had. And now you died and your son inherited whatever you had for them to inherit. Could you pass on to your son all of the wealth and property you used to have? No, you don't have it anymore. If anything, your son might inherit debt. Well, that was the case with Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve lost the right to everlasting life. They didn't have it anymore. And so when they had children, they couldn't pass on everlasting life to them. They could only pass on the tendency to sin and sickness and eventual old age and death. And that's why we have that today. But that was not God's original purpose. Now, back in Genesis chapter 3, as God was sentencing the first human pair, he held out a hope in verse 15 of someone who would come to reverse that, to undo or break up the works of the devil. And in the last book of the Bible, we see a vision of what that would mean. In Revelation chapter 22, in verse 2, you'll see something that seems familiar. It says, on both sides of the river, speaking symbolically, were trees of life producing 12 crops of fruit, yielding their fruit each month. And the leaves of the trees were for the healing of the nations. So now, instead of just one tree of life we're seeing many trees, and they're producing an abundant crop of fruit that will end up giving everlasting life to those eating it. And it says the leaves were for the healing of the nations. What that would accomplish is what the previous couple of chapters mentioned. In chapter 21, in verse 4, it says, death will be no more. In chapter 20, it talks about all of the dead coming back from the grave. The grave, as a common grave of humankind, would be emptied. And when that happens, and when humans are able to eat symbolically of that tree of life and live forever, then death with respect to the human race ceases to exist. Isn't that kind of ironic? You know, death causes humans individually to cease to exist and to become nothing. But God is going to bring about a situation where death itself ceases and comes to nothing. Isn't that something to look forward to? When Jesus was on the earth, he was the fulfillment of God's promise in Genesis 3:15 of an offspring who would break up the works of the devil. And throughout his ministry, Jesus talked about everlasting life. In fact, one of the familiar scriptures to many people, John 3:16, God loved the world so much that he gave his only begotten son. It says in that verse that people would gain everlasting life from him. If we turn to John chapter 5, verse 28 and 29, we see Jesus specifically showing that death would become undone. In verse 28, he says, do not be amazed at this, for the hour is coming in which all those in the memorial tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who did good things to a resurrection of life, and those who practice vile things to a resurrection of judgment. So he made it a point to tell people about a future resurrection in which all of those who had died would come out of the memorial tombs. Now, later on, a friend of Jesus named Lazarus got sick. And in John chapter 11, it tells us what happened to him. Jesus purposely held off going to see Lazarus to allow the sickness to run its course, and Lazarus died. But that's because Jesus had something in mind to show God's power and prove what he had been talking about. In verse 11 of John chapter 11, Jesus said, Lazarus, our friend, has fallen asleep, but I'm traveling there to awaken him. See, there Jesus indicates what death is really like. It's like a dreamless sleep. And his disciples misunderstood what he meant, but then if you look down in verse 14, Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus has died. So Jesus traveled to where Lazarus' family was, and we see the scene in verse 33 and 35. Notice how this affected Jesus. It says, when Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come with her weeping, he groaned within himself and became troubled. So he was affected emotionally by the suffering and the sorrow of these people who had lost their friend Lazarus or their relative. And then in verse 35, it says, Jesus gave way to tears, which really shows us that we should not feel bad about weeping. And in fact, we can weep with those who weep on occasions like this. Jesus did this even though he knew that in a few minutes, he was going to undo all of that. He was going to bring Lazarus back to life. But if we drop down to verse 43 and 44. Imagine if you had been there. Imagine hearing this. After saying a few words, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had been dead came out with his feet and hands bound with wrappings, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Free him and let him go." Now, this wasn't just theory. This wasn't idle promises where Jesus was saying that there was going to be a resurrection and that God had the power to do this. This was real. They saw it. They saw a man who had been dead for several days and started to decompose come back to life. Now they could put faith in what Jesus said. In fact, the certainty of a future resurrection was established by the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17, verse 31, when he said that the resurrection of Jesus Christ himself was a guarantee to us that there will be a resurrection. Paul also in his letter to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 extensively supported the fact that there will be a literal resurrection from the dead, and that we have proof of that because Jesus was resurrected. In fact, he said in verse 6 of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that there were as many as 500 eyewitnesses. Some of them in Paul's day were still alive to confirm that that had taken place. So think about it. If God could take the dust of the ground and give it life so that a person could become a conscious human, doesn't he have the power to do the same thing with a person who once lived? Even though their body may have turned back to the dust and many centuries have passed, he could recreate that person with the same personality and give him life to bring him back. And he could do this for as many people as he wants to, and he does want to. That is his purpose, to bring things full cycle so that the earth is a paradise with people living forever on it, and those who have died can come back from the dead. But even when we know these things, we still feel pain and loss. And just as Jesus did, it's not wrong for us to feel this way, to feel sorrow, and even to weep. It's not an indication of lack of faith. So we can be assured of that. But Jehovah God is the best comfort that we can have. Others can sympathize with us and speak encouraging words, but God is the only one who can really do something about it, and he wants to. Turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and notice how it describes God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 3, in that verse, it says, "Praised be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of tender mercies and the God of all comfort." So Jehovah God is the source of comfort. And in the next verse, it says, "Who comforts us in all our trials." Now, why does he do that? Well, he does that because he has compassion for us, but he also expects us to pay it forward, so to speak, to accept that comfort, but also to share it with others, because he says he comforts us in all our trials so that we may be able to comfort others in any sort of trial with the comfort that we receive from God. And that we can do. In fact, Adeline, she needed comfort herself, and she found it in God's word. And she made a list of some scriptures that were comforting and kept it next to her chair in her room. When she passed away, I found that note with those scriptures on it. And I shared that with my daughter. And my daughter found it comforting and encouraging just to read those scriptures that Adeline had written for herself. So you could say that from beyond the grave, Adeline was still able to bring comfort from the scriptures to others. We need not feel sorry for Adeline. She's in the safest, most comfortable place that anyone can be in, God's memory. It's like a sleeping baby in the arms of its mother. From her perspective, she went to bed on Saturday night, August 28th. She gently fell asleep, and then she woke up in a paradise earth with no weakness, no pain, no withered body. That's nothing to feel sorry for. When she opens her eyes, she will probably look for you. Will you be there to greet her? How happy it'll be to see old friends and relatives be united and come together again. What joy that will be. She looked forward to being able to dance again with Lyle. Will you be there to see it? I hope so. So we're going to close now by singing song number 139. You won't be able to hear each other sing, but hopefully you can join in with the song. After the song, we'd like to ask Brother Manfred Colwire to close with prayer. Before we do that, and when the song ends, we're going to stop the live streaming. After the live streaming ends, it is being recorded, so if you would like to be able to go back and see parts of this again, you can do so, and you can see that video that we showed just prior to the memorial service. So let's join together singing song number 139, and then we'll look forward to our closing prayer. And thank you for being with us.
Thank you.